out of the way. I'm going to do my best to get out of the way, but I do want to offer some quick introductions. We're joined by Catherine Rivera Hernandez, who is the appointment secretary of the governor, Gavin Newsom. She is in many ways the gateway to public service for the citizens of this great state, and essentially is in charge of appointments, but also the provider of opportunities of the citizens of the state to give back, to be part of the governance of California. And that is, I mean, very, very powerful position, and one that empowers others to be powerful as well. So it's just, you know, a great position, and it's wonderful that she's able to join us today and to share her insights about civic engagement. Next to Catherine is Alex Padilla, the Secretary of State of California, who has done heroic work to enfranchise and empower California voters. I think a record number of voters have been registered under your leadership, which is truly the essence, the heart of democracy. And small d democracy, it's, thank you for doing that. Thank you. Thank you. So we have two state-level officials and a local official. We're joined by Dean Logan, the county clerk and registrar recorder for the County of Los Angeles, who is in charge also at the more municipal level in voter registration, a whole range of civic involvement, basically the structure of let me say this, the connection between people and policy, which is what democracy is about. It's making sure that the people who are sovereign in our republic have the opportunity to be engaged and have their voices heard in the civic life of Los Angeles, of California, of the United States. So really, we're very, very fortunate that they're with us today. They can offer insights that are incredibly valuable to us as a community that is engaged in many ways, and we should be proud of our engagement, but also has room for improvement. And as we strive to be more effective and more engaged and get a greater turnout of our people at the ballot box, but also in between elections, right? They're going to offer insights that are just very, very valuable. I'll take the privilege of standing here at the podium, and I'll join them in just a second, to just offer a thought about how important civic engagement is in Washington, D.C. We talk about the people and policy. Policy matters. In the end, we're not in politics or lobbying simply to be involved in politics or lobbying. There are things that we like to accomplish, and we do accomplish those things, and it's because of people like yourselves and because of people like you across the country, in California, in New York, Boston, California, Florida, wherever we are across the country. So, like, for example, in just the last few weeks, we saw the U.S. House of Representatives pass 4 different amendments, all 4 offered by Californians, 2 from the Los Angeles area, Congressman Sherman and Congresswoman Chu. One was to help to prevent Azerbaijan from attacking aircraft flying over Artsakh. That was the Chu amendment. The Sherman amendment. The Chu amendment was to help secure peace along the line of contact in Artsakh. Then we had 2 more amendments adopted by spearheaded by legislators from Fresno. One from Fresno, Congressman T.J. Cox, who secured aid to help demine Artsakh. And then up north from the Bay Area, we had Congresswoman Spear, who passed an amendment to bump up the U.S. aid level to Armenia by $40 million, which is pretty significant. And all 4 of them were able to accomplish those things because you were behind them, because there were people pushing the policy, and those policies, become reality. And if there's U.S. leadership on Armenian issues, and that leadership is in the direction that we'd like to see, it's because we have an active community and because we have so many friends in civic life. I took the trouble to put all this on paper. There's I think Adani or maybe Mehli can hand this out a little bit later, but these 4 amendments are all here, and they're proof of the type of work that you can accomplish when you're involved in the political process. So with that being said, I'm now going to join the panelists, ask them to offer brief opening remarks, and then we'll have a discussion and later take your questions. So please do fill out the cards with your questions for our panelists today. Thank you. So, Catherine, if I could ask you first to offer any opening thoughts or share your views with us today.
Do I just press?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be here today. I've been on the job for less than 3 months, and this was one of the first invitations that I received to come and speak, so thank you for that. I met with representatives from ANCA with the governor recently in Sacramento, and I was so impressed to hear about the efforts of the organization in regards to legislation, the budget, the census, the educational curriculum. The governor shares your beliefs in, being able to share your history with others and generations to come, and to that end, we supported that with $5 million in the budget for the Armenian American History Museum. The voters of California, yeah.
Thank you.
The voters of California elected Governor Newsom at a critical time in our country, and this governor has an unparalleled commitment to unifying our state and providing opportunities for all Californians to thrive. His vision for this state is the reason I decided to join the administration when I did. And to have the opportunity to find people that are eager to be part of pushing back on the politics of division and working towards the goal of this administration, which really is a California for all. And it's not merely a slogan for this governor. We talk about having an administration that looks like the people it serves. He demands it of me on a daily basis, but also he wants appointees who are committed to helping all communities thrive. Which is why when we talk about diversity with the governor, it's not merely gender, it's not just ethnicity, it is about people's experiences and their histories. It's the reason why someone like myself, who was raised by parents who grew up working in the fields, who went to first grade in clothes that my mother made for me, can use those memories as a vivid reminder that there are families throughout California who are trying to do better for their families. To this end, I have committed to reaching out whenever possible, like opportunities like this, to communities in this state to encourage people like you in this room to be a part of this administration. And I'm pleased to see so many of you actually here, because this can be a first step to getting involved. And just last week, I appointed a very talented individual to a post at the Department of Veterans Affairs that I met at my very first reception that I attended a few months ago. So my goal here is to remove the mystery around the appointments process and to assure you that it's not as glamorous as it might sound. I am essentially an employment agency. I've got 3,000 positions, including 300 boards and commission slots that I'm required to fill. And I work in a place where everybody has a very strong opinion about the decisions that I am making. So because of the number of positions we have to fill, we do have to use the online application process. And so I've heard people say that you need to know someone, and that's not true. We have a website at the governor's website, gov.ca.gov. There's an appointment slot. There's an application that you fill out. Perfect example is you might have heard or even had firsthand experience with the Department of Motor Vehicles, and we were dealing with a lot of issues over there. Steve Gordon, who from San Jose, was reading about it in the newspaper, seeing that we needed a director. He submitted his application online and is now the director of the Department of Motor Vehicles and is doing a fabulous job. So that being said, if you do know someone, and now you know me, yes, use them. If you have connections, absolutely. And you can submit those letters of support as well. So there's an online link on the website that has all of the vacancies that's updated monthly for the boards and commissions. We've got geology, cosmetology, boating. If you have an interest, we have a board for you. And the application is fairly detailed, and it does ask some very sensitive questions, and I just always advise people to simply be honest, because we know we all have histories. I certainly have one, and you hit bumps along the way, but if you have a comeback story, we want to hear it. So I always tell people, don't take yourself out of the game. Get involved, give it a shot. And when you list your areas of interest, you can choose from all of the various slots that are available, and I advise people to really put some thought into prioritizing those interests. We do get applications where somebody lists every single board. It doesn't help us because we can't figure out how that person actually sees themselves contributing to the administration. That being said, we also get applications where we think they might be a better fit somewhere else. And so we're always looking for sort of that right fit. The other piece of advice is if you are interested in a border commission, Google it. Because it will tell you when you look it up, it will tell you how often they meet. Every single one is very different. Tell you how often they meet, where they meet, the issues that they deal with. It will also tell you if you're the type of person that doesn't want your name in the newspaper, how to avoid that. If you do want your name in the newspaper, please tell me that before I appoint you. Because and if your application is a good fit, then you'll get a call from one of our deputies. We will go through a series of interviews before we make a recommendation to the governor. And appointments is a lot of hurry up and then wait. So it can take a few weeks. It can take a few months. But as I mentioned, the governor is always looking for diversity, as I mentioned, and he's not interested in a numerical goal or a percentage being reached. We consider people's experiences in every single decision that I make. And as you know, we live in the state with the largest population of Armenian Americans, and I ask that you let your participation in this event be a first step to helping this governor to create a more inclusive California, and I look forward to the partnership and hopefully talking with some of you soon. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Once again, my name is Alex Padilla. I have the privilege and the honor of serving as your Secretary of State here in California. Not the Mike Pompeo type of Secretary of State, the State Secretary of State. Okay, different portfolio. I don't have my own plane. But thank you for the opportunity. And I'm thrilled to be here alongside Catherine, who is not just, she's brilliant, first of all. You should know that if you can't tell already, and I consider her a friend. But because I remember the first time I was introduced to an appointments secretary for a governor, I was a young intern once upon a time. I go to the governor's office, I meet the appointments secretary. I'm not trying to get a meeting. What do you mean appointment secretary? No. The appointment secretary, there's a scheduler. That's that person. An appointment secretary is exactly what Catherine explained. When you hear about a secretary of business and transportation or natural resources or the board of, the medical board of California, all these important policy decision-making bodies led by people who are not elected to office, how do they get there? They get appointed. That's Catherine's job. She makes sure the right experts are in the right positions in state government to help the governor and the legislature move along public policy and then implement the policy in California. So it's a treat to have her here with us today. And then to my left, Dean Logan, somebody that I work pretty closely with now for more than 5 years. The introduction was correct, but I want to make sure that we keep in mind Los Angeles County is the largest county in America, right, by population and by the number of registered voters and by the diversity of our registered voters. So Dean is in charge of ensuring access to our democracy for the most consequential political jurisdiction in America. You've heard the saying, so goes LA, so goes California, and so goes California, so goes the United States. Well, Dean's in charge of making sure that our registration and our ability to cast our ballot is accessible, yes, secure, but accessible and inclusive. So we're partners in that effort. And I get to sit in between the two and tell us all, buckle your seatbelts, 2020 is going to be a big year, a very important year. I think by now everybody knows that we have an election coming up. Right, November 2020, there's going to be a lot of important things on the ballot. Not just President of the United States, but also President of the United States. But a couple of important things before we get to November. First of all, there's a primary election before the general election. And it should remind us all that in the past, California typically has had a June primary election. Starting next year, we're going to be voting in March. So we'll be one of the first states to vote in a presidential primary, not one of the last. Again, very, very consequential. Now, you can't vote unless you're registered first, and I know most of you here are already registered and very active voters, but in case you're not, I think the ANC has had voter registration drives to make sure that especially young people who are eligible are much more engaged. So we want to work with you on increasing voter registration rates in the community, throughout the county, and throughout the state as well. And we'll talk more about that in the panel discussion here. So I talked about the primary and the general election. In between the two is another very critical civic exercise that we all need to participate in, and that's the 2020 census. We have to work hard to raise awareness about it, because unlike elections, doesn't happen every 2 years, doesn't happen every 4 years, only once every 10 years, we're required to have a national population count. That's what it says in the U.S. Constitution. There shall be a national population count, not a national voter count, not a national citizen count, not a national adult count. It's a national population count. We need to count every person living in the United States for some very important reasons. And again, we can get more into detail in the discussion, but to begin with, the census determines California's share and each community in California's share of federal funding for the next 10 years. So think about a lot of the issues we care about in our community: healthcare, housing, public safety, education. If we have an undercount in California, then we lose out on federal funding for our communities for 10 years. We don't get a second chance to get it right. We had to do it right the first time. The census will also determine California's level of representation in Congress. Right? We have a very good California delegation that represents us. If we have an undercount in California, we could lose representatives and representation in Congress. So it's important that we work together to make sure that everybody is counted in the 2020 census. So those are the big three: voting in the primary, the census, voting in November, a whole lot of other things that we'll get into more details here, but wanted to just set the stage for the discussion today. And I'm going to end with this: why I take this job so personal. It is small d democracy, right, the very foundation of the United States. That's why we love this country. I'm a proud son of immigrants. My parents are from Mexico. They came to the United States in the 1960s, and it took them many, many years to finally decide to realize the importance of becoming United States citizens. They became citizens in the mid to late 1990s, not just because I was leaving my engineering career and getting involved in government and politics myself, but it was in the wake of Proposition 187. So I appreciate so many young people in the room that may not remember. Those of us with a little bit more gray hair remember in the state of California, 25 years ago, it was not very friendly to immigrants. The state of California 25 years ago was not very friendly, not just to Latino immigrants, but immigrants from around the world. A lot of the rhetoric that we're hearing out of certain offices in Washington, D.C. today is very similar to what we experienced locally in 1994. And it drove a lot of people like my parents to finally realize they needed to become citizens, not just so that they can protect themselves, but that say they can register to vote and vote in every election. And it inspired our generation, who may have been a little bit cynical at the time, to realize we have to get in the game. That's how we represent and defend our communities, stand up for our communities. So when we say simple things like, oh, register to vote, or make sure you're counted in the census, it's not just an action or a form to fill out. There's some very important consequences to it. The reason the right to vote is under attack in other parts of the country, the reason certain people would like for the census to be hard to participate in, for California to have an undercount, it's because of a political agenda. And we overcome those threats, we overcome those attacks through our participation. So thank you for being here, and I look forward to our discussion.
Good morning. Again, my name is Dean Logan. I'm the Registrar Recorder County Clerk for Los Angeles County. It's truly an honor to be here. I appreciate the invitation. Thank you, Secretary Padilla, for your kind remarks. It is very much a partnership arrangement between our office locally and the Secretary of State. We worked very closely, as the Secretary said, for the last 5 years on some major reforms to the elections process in California. And as we emerge into the 2020 election cycle, some pretty revolutionary changes to the way the voting process is working in Los Angeles County. And we're very excited about that and think that it is a means of demonstrating the diversity of our community and meeting voters where they're at and providing a voting experience that lives up to the significance of that right to vote and the influence that it has in our public process. A little bit about the Registrar Recorder County Clerk's Office. I suspect we'll mostly talk today about the voting and the elections process, but I did want to share with you that our office at the local level has a few other functions. We're a highly regulated agency that provides direct service to the residents of Los Angeles County. As we're really wear three hats. As the recorder of deeds in the county, we maintain all of the records of property for Los Angeles County. So the chain of title for all real estate in LA County is maintained in our office. Those are permanent records, so you can check the history of properties and the transfer of properties in LA County. We also maintain the vital records for LA County, so birth, death, and marriage records for citizens of Los Angeles County. We issue marriage licenses, perform civil marriage ceremonies. So that's what I do when I'm having a particularly stressful day, is I go down and perform a civil marriage ceremony, and that brightens my day a little bit. But I share all that because then of course, we also, as has been said, are responsible for maintaining the records of registered voters in Los Angeles County and ensuring that there is access for our 5.4 million registered voters to participate in the elections process. Oftentimes, those diverse functions in government are seen as separate operations, and indeed in some of our neighboring counties, they are literally different departments. But I like to talk about this from the perspective that really our responsibility as the Registrar Recorder County Clerk is to maintain the individual significance of each of the residents of Los Angeles County, to preserve in history your relevance as a citizen and a resident of this county. So those pivotal moments in your life, the birth of a child, a marriage, the purchase of a new home, the purchase of the next home as you're moving through your life, and then the record of your family members who have passed away in this county. Those are permanent records that are maintained in our office, and it's important that that's done in a transparent way and in a secure way that allows you to trace that history of your relevance and your family's relevance in LA County. To that end, to bring that into the relevance of the elections process and what we're doing in Los Angeles County is, after a decade of work of really looking closely at how elections are conducted in Los Angeles County, we are now ready in 2020 to roll out a new voting experience in LA County. And in the course of that 10 years, we've spent a lot of time meeting voters where they're at, going out into the community and talking to voters about what is important about that voting experience, what makes it feel significant to you. We talked to regular voters, people who vote often regularly in every election and are actively civically engaged, but we also reached out and talked to people who are registered to vote but don't show up and vote in elections. And we talked to people who are eligible to be registered to vote but aren't currently registered to vote and participating. And perhaps most importantly, we talked to our emerging electorate. We talked to high school and college students and asked them, if we're going to invest public money in new infrastructure for voting in Los Angeles County, what can we do to make that relevant so that when you are 18 and you have that opportunity to participate in the elections process, that you will feel compelled to do that? It was a very interesting process, and one in which we really tried to separate the political element of voter participation. Obviously, as a public administrator, I don't have an influence on who the candidates are, what the measures are on the ballot, or even the financing behind those campaigns. But what I do have some control and influence over is that infrastructure of what's the time, place, and location of elections in LA County, and how does that influence, or conversely, how does that create barriers to participation in our electoral process? So I'm very excited to share with you that beginning with the March presidential primary election, we have a new voting experience in LA County. Gone are the days of a single day, single location elections experience where you have to vote on a random Tuesday between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. We will now have voting take place over an 11-day voting period in LA County that includes 2 full weekends, and we will have vote centers located throughout the county where you as a voter can go to any of those locations to vote. And that allows us, thank you. And that really allows us to tap into the rich diversity of our community. We recently went through a process of having community meetings to determine where should we have these vote centers located. And I want to thank ANC for your partnership. You served as our community partners for a couple of those meetings, and they were really important meetings because we got a lot of feedback that's very valuable. We heard from voters who told us, well, I think vote centers should be at city halls and public libraries. Those were probably the 2 most popular locations. Those were places that people associated public process, transparency, and significance. But at those same meetings, there were other people who told us, I really would rather not vote at a city hall. There's oftentimes a police department that's located in the same building as a city hall, and that could be seen as a form of intimidation in the voting process. I would rather vote in a community location or in a retail location or somewhere where I'm frequently with my friends and colleagues to make it more of a social experience. The beautiful thing about this new model is that we can accommodate all of those preferences. We will have vote centers that are in city halls and public libraries, but we will also have vote centers that are located in community rooms out in the community and near retail facilities. We even plan to have mobile voting centers that we can roll out to a public market on the weekend where we know there are going to be a lot of people. The philosophy here again is to meet people where they are. So instead of them having to seek out where voting is taking place, that if they watched a debate the night before and then they're out in the community, maybe they weren't even thinking about voting, but if it's during that 11-day period, our goal is that they're going to physically see somewhere in the course of their day that there's a place that they could go in and cast their ballot. So I get very excited about this. I could talk about it for a long time. I will wrap up to simply say that the success of this new model, though, really depends on our collective ability to educate the voters in LA County that this change is happening. It's human nature for us to be creatures of habit. If we don't do an effective job of really socializing this change and getting people aware and comfortable with this change, people are just going to wake up on March 3rd and think it's the same as it has been in prior elections. So I look forward to the partnership that we had on the Vote Center Placement Project. It was a great example. The work that we do with your community to provide language assistance and translated materials in Armenian, which I have many of those materials with me that I've placed out in the hallway. Invite you to take those, help us spread the word, and help us find the right places to get in and make presentations and have these conversations so that we can have an elections process that represents the rich diversity of this community.
Thank you. I'd like to touch on 2 issues which I think each of you touched on, but they're very, very high priorities for the Armenian National Committee. And the first is the census that we talked about, and the second is voter registration. And by way of preface, let me offer a thought. Alex, you mentioned something that speaks to me as an Armenian so deeply, which is those conversations that took place a quarter century ago about why it's important to register to vote, and then obviously, at an intellectual level, it's easy to communicate that idea, but at the level of action, there's so many people who don't, in their heart, believe that it makes a difference, and that lack of faith in the system, that they haven't seen the results they've hoped for in the past. That's profound in a community. I've seen it in our community. Okay, I've seen it in our community. Okay, I'll start over. Okay, on the census and on voting. On census, I'll start this way. Many of us come from places in the world, as Armenians have roots in the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, and the Middle East, where the government knocking on your door with questions is, a scary thing, not a good thing. So there's a legacy of that, and the notion of, we know that to count, we need to be counted, whereas in many parts of the world, to keep your head down and not be counted is actually the best strategy to survive. So I think that's not unique to Armenians. It exists among many communities. So on the census, we have that issue. And on the voting, we have the issue of, we all know at the intellectual level you need to vote, but many people don't. And somewhere in that, failure to vote might be some lack of faith that it makes a real difference. Of course it does. We know that. But getting that communicated to people in a way that gets them to the ballot box or the mobile station or the retail or the library or the city hall, that last step is so important. So I was going to ask maybe, we start with Dean. Dean, I saw in your bio that you're an instructor at CSUN. I can tell you at a very, very modest level, I started teaching Sunday school last year. It's by far the hardest job. Teaching is by far the hardest job in the world. And I can only imagine what it's like at the university level, but my 10-year-old Sunday schoolers are pretty much more than I can handle every Sunday. I go to church afterwards, so, pray for my soul. And okay, so can we start perhaps with the census and thoughts on, just thoughts on how to speak to and how the government can speak to groups that have roots abroad, and how the communities can speak to themselves, among themselves, about making sure that we're counted during the census.
Sure, I'll talk briefly about the census from a local level, and then we're fortunate that Secretary Padilla is the guru of the census for the state of California, so I'm sure he has plenty to say. I had an opportunity earlier this week to moderate a panel on the census at the local Association of Cities, and it's a very interesting panel that talked about the challenges, the very challenges that you're talking about. Is what is the right messaging to encourage people to participate in the census and to overcome what is a pretty significant layer of fear about, as you say, about people coming to your door, and about whether or not the data is going to be secure, if it's okay to share the information that's being asked, and all of that. And I think that the biggest takeaway for me from the speakers on that panel was really talking about how that is important at the local level, that the most influential people, and this transcends to voting too, by the way, that those who have the most influence on whether people are going to participate in the census are their family members and the people that they trust in the community. And so all of us will talk about how the census determines our representation in Congress and the allocation of our districts for elected officials. It turns out for most people surveyed, that's not a particularly compelling argument to participate in the census. It sounds like the messaging that is more important are things like hearing from firefighters and from first responders and school teachers and people in the community that recognize the funding structure and how that relates to the outcome of the census. So I would just say that I think it's great opportunities for organizations like yours to again, just like with voting, to be partners in getting that message out and letting people know where they can participate in the census as soon as that information is available, so that they aren't among the people where people are knocking on their door, and that they know that there are places, safe places that you can go. We're talking about in LA County, literally every county department is involved in the census in terms of making our facilities available with kiosks, because this is an online census too. So there's a digital divide issue that's going to be at play too. So making sure that we have locations that are available where people can come out and fill out that information and feel comfortable with it.
Good. So let me start with census, and then I'll come back to the voting part of the question. But you're absolutely right. When I touched on the census in my opening remarks, I touched the surface level of why the census is important. We all know that the census count is what determines our share of federal funding. And it sounds, yeah, okay, that's important, but it's amorphous, right? What does that mean for California? It's not just what it means for California. It means what does it mean for every single community? Let's take education, for example. What does it mean for each school district? And literally, what does it mean for each school? 10 years ago, the biggest undercounted population in California was children under the age of 5. Right? So that means school districts around the state were getting less than their share of funding, but the children were still showing up to school for the next 10 years. Is there enough money for classrooms, for teachers, for books, for computers, for everything else, right? If we wonder why schools are sometimes have strained budgets, it's a lot of reasons, but that's one of them. So it's a very personal, direct consequence for every family in California. But census information also informs policy, and I think we should be very careful here. So the information we submit through the census, and some people are cautious about, what does the government want to know about me? The information asked on the census survey and collected by the census is kept private and confidential, right? The Census Bureau is not allowed to share any personal information with other departments, other agencies for any other purpose. What they do share is aggregate statistics. And how can that be helpful for public policy? Well, we look at not just population counts, where should transportation dollars go? Well, where there's more people, there's going to be more demands for roads and public transit, et cetera, so the money flows. But think about, again, the education example. We're still fighting the fight to have an Armenian box to check, but there's a way to identify yourself as Armenian on the form. 10 years ago, the census estimates that there was just a couple 100,000 Armenians in Southern California. We know there's a lot more than that, right? So when we encourage participation and sharing that kind of information, that informs policymakers. Like, wow, there's actually a more accurate count of Armenians in these areas. Aside from just giving money to schools, maybe that helps us justify specific programs. When we talk about culture, when we talk about history, when we talk about those specific programs in schools and community centers, that is informed by census information. So if we don't participate, it makes the effort harder to implement those types of ideas and initiatives. Another thing about the census, because you're right, whether it's years ago, home country, or even in recent years in this country, we've been telling people, you don't have to answer the door, but now with the census, we want people to respond. So let's be informed that there's multiple ways to participate in the census. And let me start with a calendar. February 3rd of 2020, vote by mail ballots begin to go out in the state of California for people who like to vote by mail. February 22nd, the vote centers open in California for counties like Los Angeles. You can go vote in person or drop your ballot off in person. March 3rd is the primary election day. March 4th, I will be very tired. March 12th is the day that postcards begin to go out from the Census Bureau with instructions of how to go online to submit your census information. And you're right, Dean, there's still a digital divide in America, and California is no exception. The Census Bureau will continue to try with every household that doesn't immediately respond with the census. So if you respond to that first postcard, submit your information, you're going to be left alone. If you don't respond, they're going to try again. If you don't respond to the second effort, then eventually the Census Bureau will send you the form, the survey form. That used to be the first thing we used to get. Now it will be the third or fourth thing that we get. So part of my advice is, if people are fearful of government representatives coming to knock on the door, it's participate early. The sooner you respond and participate with the census, the less of a chance there will be somebody coming into the community and knocking on doors seeking that same information. And we'll have options for how to participate. You can participate by submitting your information online to that paper survey form that will eventually be mailed if you don't respond, or there will actually be a third way to participate, and that is by phone. So you have options for how to participate in the census. A little bit of bad news, the paper forms will not be available from the Census Bureau in Armenian, only in English and Spanish, but by phone they will handle many, many more languages. So that's the good news there. On the voting side, it's important that we vote, right? That's how we make our voice heard. But here's the beauty of voting, and I'm going to start with a quick math lesson. All right, I know there's a lot of adults here who haven't been in school in a while, but I promise it's not going to be too hard. My favorite subject growing up was math. So let me ask you, what's bigger, 1 or 10? 10. It's not a trick question. 10, right? What's bigger, 10 or 100? 100. Now you're probably wondering, where is he going with this? Well, that's the case both in math and it's the case in our democracy. One of the beautiful parts of our democracy is if you're eligible to vote, if you're a citizen, 18 years or older, you can register and you can vote. But if you register and vote, how many voices is that in our democracy? 1. But if you organize your family, your brothers, your sisters, your parents, your sons and daughters who are eligible, your cousins and uncles, and you get 10 voters to register and vote, how many voices is that in our democracy? 10. That's louder. That's stronger. And if we organize voter registration drives in our community or in our schools, and you get that many more people registered and voting and active, that's our voice being heard that much more strongly, much more louder. And so I always remind people of that. It's important to fight for our right to vote, but equally powerful is our right to organize. And that is how our community is heard even louder.
In fact, when I first met the Secretary of State, that's exactly what we were doing. It was my first, where I got paid to do political work, and it was on a campaign where him and I first met well, we won't count, it was a long time ago. We're still young. But what I will add is at the governor's office, we have long been had an effort underway to hire over hundreds of people to staff the census. And going back to what I was saying about having an administration that looks like the people it serves. We're not hiring people from Sacramento and trying to send them out into the communities. We're going into the communities, finding the people who are already doing that work, who already have the relationships, who have already done the outreach, and have that trust so that they can then be the ones that we hire on to talk to people so that you can build that trust so that people will participate. I will just pitch again, we still have positions to fill, we always do. So again, and I know that when we met in Sacramento with the governor, for those that were there all cramped in my office, he also talked about the funding and about all of the money that is going to be going out into the communities to help people to also, who are already doing that outreach, like your organization, to encourage people to participate.
Let me, first of all, thank you all. Those insights are incredibly valuable. And ideas that we, in turn, need to communicate to the rest of our community so that they act upon these very sound principles. Let me just put this in a context I think that many of you would speak to your hearts. You might read in Ospadez about the latest developments in Washington about Armenian American issues. You may have read just yesterday that Congressman Adam Schiff from right here in this area wrote to the rest of his House colleagues saying, let's get Armenian genocide recognition done. This is the time, in the context of what's happening in Syria, this is the time. Let's look over, that's one. Second, I mentioned earlier that the House Representatives said that no U.S. anti-aircraft weapons should ever be used to shoot down aircraft flying over Artsakh, right? That's the Sherman Amendment. The Chu Amendment said we need to protect Artsakh from aggression from Azerbaijan, and we need to do that by installing gunfire locators. This is like arcane stuff, it's policy stuff, it's wonkish stuff, but it's important stuff. Amasya is here, who works for the Halo Trust, which demines Artsakh, because the Congress has, over the last decade and more, appropriated about $20, $30, $40 million to support Artsakh for other programs as well, but also for demining. So if Artsakh is being demined and some school child doesn't have to worry about being blown up when they go out to play, or a farmer can till his field without getting blown up, right? That's because of our involvement. All this stuff, the Artsakh stuff, the genocide stuff, the Spear Amendment, which bumped up USA to Armenia by $40 million to help strengthen and sustain Armenia's democracy, we care about that. We want that $40 million. We want Artsakh to be demined. We don't want our anti-aircraft shooting down Armenians flying over the free land of Artsakh. We don't want Azerbaijani aggression to go unchecked. We want all these things, right? We want them. I know we all do, because we fight for them. But if you trace each of them back, right, to their actual root, it goes back to somebody filling out a census form, getting counted, and then being able to have a voice in our system. It goes back to that difficult discussion with someone's mom or dad or grandparents saying, you might not be interested in registering to vote, you might not think it makes a whole lot of difference, but it sure as heck does, and here are the examples. Everything that we're able to do in Washington, D.C., every step we've taken forward, every incremental action that we've been able to sustain on the path toward a better U.S. policy on Armenian issues, they all have their roots in these very, very simple acts. And I'll be more precise about it. They have their roots in California, and they have their roots here in Southern California. There's no part of the country that drives the Armenian American agenda more than Southern California. And that is because we have great leaders such as these, but also because the Armenian community steps up. We can do more, right? Imagine what we're doing. We're doing all these things now. Where would we be if we had a better census count? Where would we be if we had higher voter registration and higher turnout on Election Day? I just want you to understand that the stuff of government is the stuff that you hear about in Washington. You might check us out online. You might see different things happening. They all have their roots in the work that you all are doing. So let me, if there's anyone.
I'll just appreciate you laying it out that way. And I don't think we've overlooked, it wasn't emphasized in the panel, but something that goes very much with everything we've been talking about is also naturalization. Right? We have maybe some elders in the audience or back at home who haven't taken that step of becoming citizens, and so therefore they're not eligible to register and vote. They still can participate in the census, and they need to. But when it comes to voting, you do need to be a citizen. I know I went through this with my parents. It took decades, literally. You know, my mom and my dad had this dream, maybe one day we're going to go back. Maybe one day we're going to go back. The longer we're here, right, the more our family and our experiences here, the more you're here, the more you're paying taxes, you're buying homes, you're not just having kids, you're having grandkids. You know what? Your future is here. We'll go back to visit, but there's no moving back. So even taking that step of naturalization for people who are eligible is important as part of this path towards citizenship, towards registration, to being active voters, and yes, census, and everything else.
Okay. Thank you. Catherine, a question for you. A college student writes, I'd like one day to be eligible for a board or commission or an appointment. What are the types of things I can do now in school and then after school so that I would be a qualified candidate for consideration for a board or commission down the road?
Well, I would say being here shows that you're on the right track. Really, like I was talking about as far as experiences and engagement, it's getting involved, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, a paying job. But I will tell you, I appointed somebody that I was very impressed by, whose first job was at Chick-fil-A, who talked about all of the hard work and having to do the cold chicken, and he just had this story about how he worked his way up and is now looking for an entry job. It really is about engaging in your community, engaging in hard work, showing that you have interest and effort. But I hesitate to say that there's anything specific, because really it's about the traits that people have, and we want people who are passionate, people who care for others, who want to help and have an interest in really serving the public.
Okay, I have a couple of tough questions here on the census. One is that Armenian Americans kind of fall into different categories in the census world because we have roots in the Middle East and North Africa, and also roots in Eurasia. So an Armenian who comes from the former Soviet Union or Armenia is in one part of the world, another is from another part of the world. So the question, I guess, would be like Armenians, and then on top of that, Armenians come from part of the world called the Caucasus. So there's this notion of like, well, we're Caucasian, does that fit under the white category? There's some sense of that the Armenians fall in different categories, and how can Armenians address that? If they're asking where they're from, maybe they'll say I'm from Iran, or maybe they'll say I'm from Lebanon, or I'm from Egypt. Am I Egyptian? Well, yes, I'm from Egypt, but I'll identify as Armenian. So an impossible question, but how can Armenians deal with the fact that we're from, probably coming to the U.S. from 30 different countries?
And again, I know there's ongoing efforts, and plans to hopefully someday have an Armenian box on the census form itself, the decennial census form specifically. So what's going to be there is a generic, is it Caucasian or Latino, Hispanic, et cetera, et cetera. So I think one of the things that we're encouraging is if you identify as Armenian, regardless of country of origin, there's that other box and write it in, Armenian.
Write in's the answer for us. Okay, that's very important. You hear all that? We need to write in Armenian. That is the answer. So talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to everyone you possibly can. That's very, very essential.
That takes the guessing out of government to find out how many Armenians
that would be great.
are in the country or in California or in each community.
Okay. Here's another tough question for all three of you, is that on the one hand, we have the state of California, which has been very friendly to immigrants, and we have voices at the federal level who are just the opposite. How does California try to govern in this environment? Again, a tough question. I know I'll leave it to all three of you to try to offer some wisdom on that.
I'll go first. I'll get them off the hook, and I'll go first. Look, I think, again, our democracy is not perfect in the sense that everybody gets what they want every single time. But I think our democracy is perfect in the sense that the opportunity to influence is always there. The opportunity to participate is always there. And it's through our participation that we don't just elect who our representatives are at all levels of government, but by extension, what policies are being adopted or even prioritized for discussion, whether it's in the halls of Congress, whether it's in the state capitol, whether it's in City Hall or at the school board level, everywhere in between. The structure of our government is such that, the federal government does have certain jurisdictions and roles and responsibilities. And the state governments have certain jurisdictions and roles and responsibilities, as does the county, as does the city, et cetera. So we find ourselves, I think, at a time where, yes, the leadership and the vision of the leaders of California is very, very different than in Washington, D.C. But even in Washington, D.C., well, the White House is the White House, that's one thing. Congress is another. The U.S. Senate is one thing, the House of Representatives is another. So this separation of powers and checks and balances makes for a very inefficient government, but at the same time, it makes for one that's not going to get too crazy one way or the other, from one year to the next. So there's relative stability over time, and there's some comfort in that. Over the last couple of years, I'll just be blunt. When we went from the Obama administration to the Trump administration, it started off rocky, and it's gotten worse every day since, from a Californian general perspective. So the California leaders have been very intentional and vocal about, look, if the federal government is going to do things in a way that's contrary to what California envisions, where we embrace diversity, where we try to include people and have everybody participate and everybody's respected, then we're going to push back. And that pushback has been labeled the resistance, but I think if you look at specific actions, has been at times through legislation, right? Whether it's access to health care or environmental protection. If the federal government's moving one way and California can protect our environment by advancing public policy, then the legislature has done that. The governor, from Governor Brown to Governor Newsom, has done the same thing. At times, it's been through litigation, right? If there's changes to policy or law at the federal level that we feel is not in California's best interest, then we could try to sue. And we have a lot. And we've won a lot. But I think the most powerful, because, the legislative, times come and go, the legal stuff comes and goes, the most important part of advancing California values is by engaging people in our democracy. And so it does come back to everything we've been talking about: naturalization, voter registration, voting, census. Pretty soon we'll be talking about redistricting and how we draw boundaries for congressional districts and legislative districts and council districts and school board districts and everything in between. So the more we're active in participating, the more the policy arena reflects us, the people.
I'll say that I think the governor has been very clear about where he stands on immigrants and his support for them, and has acknowledged repeatedly what the secretary has said is that, people are here and they're contributing in any number of ways, whether it's taxes or, they're living here, they're participating in, the economy, they're participating in sort of the social sort of movements. And so whether it's education, whether it's budget, whether it's medical, he has been very clear about his support for all Californians, regardless of status, and in fact signed a bill just a couple weeks ago that will allow people, regardless of immigration status, to serve on boards and commissions. And so he's trying to sort of set the standard. I don't know that it will ever become the norm or that it might catch on, but he's really sort of being that role model for California. No, it's okay. No, it governs just state, yeah.
I would just add that I think that it's important when we think about civic participation and civic engagement is to recognize that it's a long game. It's not something that just happens every 2 years or every 4 years. It's about active engagement and active participation all along. And while we live in a time where there's so much information sharing on social media and it's easy to get sucked into that focus of what's the latest coming out from the federal government. The truth of the matter is that local government really matters in our system in this country. That's where a lot of the original policy ideas that roll up to the federal government, that's where they're incubated and proven to be successful. So I think a few things that I would say is while it can get easy to be discouraged by what's happening at the federal level at any time, that shouldn't change the fact that there are opportunities to be engaged at the local level. And that's a place where we've worked really hard. Part of this reinvention of the voting process is to try and increase participation in the local elections where there are day-to-day decisions made about infrastructure and programs that will have an impact. The other thing I would say is two things to keep in mind about the current environment. One is oftentimes I think we fall victim to kind of this assumption that California doesn't matter or that we're politically skewed one direction or even Southern California. But there's pretty good evidence to show that we are having an influence. If you look at the 2018 election, the political control of the U.S. House of Representatives was determined by elections that came down to a handful of votes in Southern California for members of Congress. So we do make a difference, and it's important to do that. And the final thing that I would mention is we have a great opportunity in March of 2020 with the presidential primary moved up earlier in the process. All indications, at least right now, are that it's still a wide open contest for who the nominee is going to be, at least on the Democratic Party side. And California is going to have a voice in determining who moves forward in that process. So the March 3rd presidential primary election is yet another opportunity to really demonstrate where California and Southern California in particular can have an influence.
Dean, I'm not sure who we should be thanking for the early primary date, but I can tell you that with one exception, each of the major Democratic presidential primary candidates have spoken and on the Armenian issue favorably and also co-sponsored the Armenian Genocide Resolution. I don't think it's a coincidence that the primary date is early this year. I think that gives California a lot of leverage on the national stage, and that is something certainly the Armenians welcome. Who should we thank for that?
Well, I think Secretary Padilla deserves a fair amount of credit for that, and Governor Brown.
Thank you.
And it was all very intentional, right? With California, much more meaningful. Yeah, anybody who wants to be president, regardless of political party, I should say, this is all parties that are now voting in March, have to pay attention not just to California contributors, but to California voters. Yep. You have to come earn our vote. So this is an opportunity both through organizations, but as voters, when the candidates and campaigns reach out to you asking for your vote, that's your opportunity to ask these questions. where do you stand on these resolutions or these House bills or issues in general?
There's a nuts and bolts question here about the census takers. I imagine that the census will start recruiting census takers and census workers soon. And number two, poll workers. I'm not sure that our community is well aware of, like, literally what's involved. Is that a one-day project? Is there training? If someone were to think about becoming a poll worker, what might be involved? Also, what might be involved in being a census taker? Is there some message that Armenians, I'm sure, would be very interested in serving in both capacities, but we're just curious about, like, what's the process and when does that start? When could Armenians start thinking about how they can be poll workers or census takers?
Well, I'll take the poll worker question first, and I really appreciate you asking that, because it's an area where we absolutely need that community partnership. And as I said, we're moving into an 11-day voting period, so it's not just a one-day assignment now. Now we're going to need people who can work for 4 days or 11 days, depending on the particular assignment. We are recruiting now for the March election. You can get information on our website at lavote.net. In particular, we need and we want to increase the availability of multilingual election workers to work at those sites. It's a combination of community engagement and volunteerism. We do provide a stipend for that, so there is some remuneration for it. It's not your highest paid job, but we try to make sure that you can at least have a decent meal over the course of those days that you're working. We do provide training, so there's a full training program, and we're in the midst of doing that right now. So want to encourage, again, there's materials out that I've left out in the hallway. Get in touch with us. That's another place. If you know of places in the community where we can come and give presentations to encourage recruitment, we can do that as well. So it's a great opportunity to give back to the community and to provide service.
So if I could just ask, so the length of time commitment for somebody would be, like, generally speaking, how much time would they need to have available? I'm thinking, is this better for a retired person? Is it better for, who are you looking?
Yeah, so we try to be flexible, but again, we also want consistency and we want good quality workers. So ideally right now we're looking for people who can work for a 4-day period, which would be the Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday of the final part of that voting period, or people who are available to work the full 11-day period. Now that said, we will also take people who can only work on weekends. So if you're available and are interested in working on the 2 weekends, on Saturdays and Sundays, we will do that as well. We will also be ramping up with more workers on election day, because we think that despite the change, there's still going to be a lot of voters who are going to show up on Tuesday election day. So we want to build our capacity for that as well.
I guess a very technical census question. If someone does, visit someone's home and they're speaking to them about filling out the form, would they also explain that they have the option of writing in their identification of choice? Like, we're concerned that because there's not an Armenian box to be checked and there needs to be some proactive effort to write in Armenian, that, I guess my broader question is, how can we make sure, part of this is our challenge, it's on us, how can we make sure that folks know that as they look at that form, they have the option of writing in Armenian?
So the representatives, official representatives from the U.S. Census Bureau should know and should provide that guidance or assistance, if you will. And the best way to ensure that the Census Bureau enumerators is what they're called, prioritize that and are aware is if you all apply to be enumerators. So if you Google U.S. Census Bureau, they're hiring. They're still hiring. All right, so see her in the back. Sign up, because they need more people who know the community, understand the community, have clout in the community, to be those folks assisting people in the community to participate in the census. So thank you for being here. Another thing that I hope is much more helpful than confusing is there will be a lot of communication coming directly from the federal government, right? The census is administered by the federal government, the Department of Commerce, U.S. Census Bureau. Knowing that the census is so critical for the state of California, the state budget includes funding for census outreach and awareness and assistance. So there will be some communication, some media campaigns, social media, nonprofit organizations active in communities trying to deliver that information as well. It's not going to completely align, although we're trying, with the information that the Census Bureau is putting out. So you have some federal communication, some state and local communication coming at you, along with the local nonprofit organizations, maybe even some cities as well. So hopefully a lot of this information is helpful. I know that a lot of the materials will be translated into Armenian. That's informative, even though the survey form itself is not. A lot of the information and awareness outreach will be in Armenian as well.
That is of great importance to our community, that even if the form itself is not in Armenian, that there be explanatory materials that that people could read and feel comfortable. I mean, the message it sends to have forms in Armenian is both materially helpful and also sends a great message that we care about your voice. And going back to the census enumerator, just a technical question. Is this generally a full-time job? Or can someone do it part-time? Maybe our friend would know. Like, would that need to be the only professional engagement of that person during the time that they're hired?
So I can be corrected if I'm wrong. I understand there's both part-time and full-time, but they're temporary positions. So this is, but if you do a good job, you're going to get the you're going to catch the attention of a manager who may want to hire you for other projects after the decennial census. So there is longer-term job opportunity here. Right.
That's okay. So we'll do that later. You'll be here. We'll talk later because those are wonderful opportunities. It's a chance to make sure your voice is heard, and also it's I'm sure a fascinating job. Yes. So the poll working and census enumerating are both opportunities that are available to Armenian Americans. The census website is a place people can go to visit. And for poll workers, again, Dean, where do people go?
LAvote.net.
LAvote.net. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Which is awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Catherine, I want to dig a little deeper into the types of opportunities that exist for appointments, and again, the process they can go through. You said there's an online process that people can apply through, and then you also said letters would make a difference. How does that work?
And so, yes, so the online application process is available on the governor's website, and then after you submit an application, you can also simply mail or email letters of support out to the office itself. Okay. Yeah, and all that information is online.
Okay, I should know the answer to this, but is that judicial appointments are...
Judicial appointments are separate. Okay. There's Marty Jenkins is our judicial secretary, and I'm responsible for those appointments. Okay. But that's also online as well.
Okay. But lawyers who aren't necessarily interested in being a judge but feel they have something to offer somewhere else could work through your office?
Yes, just like me.
Yeah? Okay. That's right. And I think how are we doing on time, Ike? Oh, okay. Well, why don't we offer, in any particular order that you guys would like, any sort of final thoughts you'd like to share with us today?
Well, again, I'll just say thank you so much for the opportunity. And as I said in my remarks, it's these kind of engagements that are really going to help us be successful in rolling out the new voting solution in LA County for 2020. So please take the materials that I've left outside. Please contact us if there are organizations that we can come and speak to and give presentations. Help spread the word about the community demonstrations on the new equipment. We are very proud of the work that we've done, and I appreciate the comment, and thank you for your service as a poll worker in the past. We have worked really hard to increase the availability of Armenian speakers at our vote centers, but also to provide translated materials for election information. So our website is available in Armenian. All of our materials for the new solution are available in Armenian. But one of the challenges we face in that is also getting people active on our community voter outreach committee to help us review those materials, because we've learned along the way that simply doing a word-for-word translation doesn't necessarily get the job done in an effective way. So there's lots of opportunities for us to partner. We get better at what we do because of this type of engagement. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today and your interest and commitment to help us build the civic participation in LA County.
Well, like I said at the beginning, 2020 is going to be a big year. We have the March primary, we have the census, and we have the November general election. I hope through this conversation we've given you a little bit more of information that will help you participate next year and help spread the word as well. I think particularly here for Southern California and LA County specifically. When Dean came into his job and I came into mine, LA County statistically kind of lagged the rest of the state on voter registration rates and turnout rates. And we've been working hard to close that gap and try to put LA County on the forefront of participation. We're doing it through outreach. We're doing it through systematic changes of how we can administer elections, et cetera. But the reason that's been the case is if we look at history, whether it's on the voting side or the census side, diverse communities, young people, working class communities, that's where registration rates, voting rates, and census participation rates have been lower. So we have to work a little bit extra hard to make sure that we get people involved, we get people informed, we get people ready to participate. And I think we're making tremendous progress, but there's a lot at stake in 2020, and we're counting on you to help us. So help us help you. We need to help you help us. We're all in this together. Thank you.
Well, it was very clear to me from our meeting with the ANC and with the governor how he feels about the relationship that he's built with the organization, and I hope that now that I am on board, I will be able to continue to have those meetings, that we continue to discuss how we can expand participation in the governor's administration. And I would really ask that you consider really sort of contributing and getting involved, or if you know someone who would like to serve. We're a pretty open book. We're easy to find, and I just look forward to maybe talking with some of you in the future about opportunities.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We know how valuable your time is, and we really appreciate you guys coming here and talking to our community. How about another round of applause for our panel? We just wanted, as a parting gift, to give you guys a frame, a little token of our appreciation. And I know you guys have to take off at 1 o'clock, but we do have lunch outside, so if you guys want to stick around for a quick bite, I think you have a little bit of time. That would be amazing. So if we can just take a quick picture and... Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.